Are we live? Are we going, guys?
We are live. We're just looking at attendees joining. So thank you for those who are joining on time. We appreciate it. It's starting to get an uptick quickly here. So when we get to kind of a critical mass, we will get started. So if everyone hang tight for a minute or so and we will start the session. Okay, looks like we are good to go. So hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. We're really excited to have this discussion. Thank you for joining us for Just Say Yes. Don't let your inner critic stop you. And so just before we start, a couple of housekeeping tips. Please put any of your questions in the Q&A section. We will get to them probably at the end of the session. We might sprinkle a few in here and there. Lena and I are here from WIL Montreal and we'll be engaging with our speaker today. The presentation is being recorded and it's going to be uploaded to the WIL International website following the event. So please go ahead and refer to it, share it with your friends. We are looking to grow our community here in Montreal. So if you like what you see, please let us know what else you'd like to see and share the information with your networks. In accordance with our tradition, I'd like to first begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather from where I'm sitting is the traditional and unceded territory of the Mohawk Nation, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst nations and people, a little bit like what we're doing today. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Women in Leadership, to give you a little bit of a background very quickly for those who are new to us, we were founded in 2001. It's a Canadian national foundation and our goal is really to help build inspirational programs that bring women together to collaborate in the development of their leadership skills. And really we try to create a positive change in the future of women's leadership. We are here for you. We're here to engage and share. So once again, if you do have any ideas of what you would like to see, and we're hoping to have live in-person events shortly, please do let us know. A little bit about our speaker today. We're so excited to have you here, Marion. Thank you for being here. Marion is a key player and has been in infrastructure for over 25 years. She's excelled in various technical positions. And as a woman in tech, she has deep experience with being the minority and in how to thrive in a still very much male-dominated industry. So Marion, welcome. Thank you for being here. And I'd like to start by just having you tell us a little bit about why you chose this topic today.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity. I was really excited when you reached out to me, and I think I chose this topic because it's funny. The minute that you kind of reached out to me, and the first kind of reflex I had was, yeah, sure, I'll be there and do it, and I'll talk with you guys. The first thing that popped into my head as I kind of walked away from my phone to make myself a coffee was panic, right? And as I was making myself a coffee, I started chuckling with myself because that voice in my head that kept coming back saying, who the heck are you? Who's going to listen to you? What do you have to say? What are you doing this for? What are you doing this to yourself for, right? All of those negative things that pop into our head. I started chuckling to myself and I said, well, there's what I'm going to talk about right there, right? Because I think that, yeah, I said yes. And the first thing that met me on the other side of that yes was panic. And that immediate critic inside of your head that stops you from going forward sometimes. And I think it's worth repeating over and over and over again. That we talk about this as we go forward.
Absolutely. And so tell me a little bit about what made you say yes in this instance, for example.
Yeah, I think that I think it's important for us to push ourselves beyond those limits. As I mentioned, we had a talk last week, I think it was, right, to kind of prep for this. And one of the things that happened in the last few years in my life here at Intact, I work for Intact Financial Corporation, and we have great programs to develop our leadership potential. And one of the programs that we have is that you can get handpicked by your supervisor to be trained for potential leadership growth going forward. And as we were sitting around, and I was in one of those conferences, as we were sitting around talking at one point in a break, I heard two perfectly capable, obviously qualified women pop up while we were chatting. And the first thing that popped out of their mouth was, "I'm not ready." And it popped into my head that in the last 25 years that I've been in IT, I might have heard that come out of the mouths of two men in my career, whereas in the 15 minutes that I was talking with these two women, it popped up from both of them. And it's really something that I think we need to tackle, and we need to push ourselves. These were women who had been chosen by their own management, right? Handpicked to be part of, where obviously they were ready. They were ready to move forward in their career. But the first thing that popped into their head is, "I'm not ready." And this is what they were comfortable speaking out with in a public setting. So I can just imagine what the inner dialogue must have been like, at that time. So I think it's very important for us to understand that the only way we're going to be able to move forward, and sometimes we don't have a choice but to put ourselves in those uncomfortable situations. And that voice never goes away, right? It never goes away. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been public speaking since I was in high school. I know I can do this. But yet, as I put down the phone after I said yes to you and walked away to make a coffee, there it was again, right? So I think it's the only way sometimes is that we have to put ourselves in those situations.
So Marion, sorry, Anne-Lisa. Marion, what kind of mechanisms do you recommend? Like, how did you get to the point where you had that inner critic in your mind and to overcome that? What steps did you take to put yourself in a position and say, "Hey, I'm just going to go forward and bite the bullet and go ahead"?
Yeah, and I think that's something that, first of all, it's an individual thing, right? What works for me may not work for you, may not work for the next person. What worked for me really is that I kind of trained myself. First of all, I had very encouraging parents. I had the kind of support system already around me that modeled bravery as a value within our family, right? So, and I think, again, we can have a very long discussion about why, as women, we have a tendency to hold back and hold ourselves back in many instances. I think we can have a very long conversation about the whole society that we live in that sometimes does that. And sometimes it's familial as well, right? I've had conversations with some friends of mine where the more conservative aspect of their family kind of kept them from taking risks. But I think that you need to surround yourself with a support group of people that you trust. You need to have at least one person. If you can have two or three, great. But you need to have at least that one person that you can soundboard off of, that you trust, that will be able to give you the confidence or to help you take those steps, to help you take those steps forward. But in the meantime, if you're by yourself and you've got no one but yourself, the only thing I would tell you that worked for me is that I exposed myself to those risks. At one point or another, no matter how much you try to kind of like navigate and strategize and do the best that you can, there comes a moment where you're going to have to take that little leap of faith and put yourself in those uncomfortable situations and prove to yourself that you are capable of handling whatever comes your way, right? It's not even, I think sometimes women might have this innate ability to foresee all of the potential pitfalls in front of us. We've got this great big wonderful imagination. I think biologically speaking, we're like kind of wired to see the worst that could possibly happen in order for us to like protect our offspring from harm. And I think sometimes we're not self-aware enough to understand that that mechanism is an automation, and it doesn't always reflect reality, right? How many times have we stopped ourselves or worried to death about something only to find that 99% of it never happened, right? So let's use that great big wonderful imagination of ours to start, yes, put yourself in those situations, theoretically in your mind, look at all the pitfalls, and then at the same time try to see, well, how would I handle it if this comes my way? How would I handle it if this calamity happens? Guess what? One thing I can guarantee, the sun's going to rise tomorrow, and it's probably not going to be nearly as bad as you think it is, right? I think that we calamitize, we dramatize things in our heads sometimes. We make them out to be worse than what they may possibly be, and that's a good thing. Let's use it for our own purposes to be able to say, you know what, I might fail. Matter of fact, I can almost guarantee at one point or another, you're going to face some failures. I don't think we're even afraid of necessarily taking the risk. We're afraid of not being able to handle what comes our way. And that's the muscle we have to develop, right? And the only way to do it sometimes is to just put yourself in that situation and prove to yourself that you can handle it. It's not nearly as bad as you think it is.
When we were talking, I think on last Friday, prepping for this event, you came up with a quote or had found a quote around failure.
Yeah.
What exactly, do you remember?
Yeah.
Success.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say success is on the other side of failure or something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure anybody who's listening right now, one of the reasons why we do these kinds of things, if you're anything like me, you've read a million books, you've listened to, I don't know how many hours of podcasts, right? So you have these things that get stuck into your head. And I don't know, so I can't, give credit to the person who actually said this quote, but the quote is, everything that you dream of is on the other side of fear. It's on the other side of it. And sometimes, not sometimes, I could tell you from my own experience, like I'm 51 years old, I can tell you there is no getting around it. You could try to go around it. You could try to strategize. You could try to do all of those good things that you need to do, right? To be able to try to get yourself there, which sometimes you just got to walk through the fire. And on the other side of that, like I said, once you say yes, the first thing that's going to greet you is fear. The first thing that's going to greet you is panic. The first thing that's going to come up to you is all of those insecurities are going to pop up right away. You have to nod, smile, and keep going anyway, right? You have to acknowledge the fact, don't push it down, right? But you just, yes, I'm nervous. Yes, there's a potential for things to go wrong. Yes, there's this. It's okay. I'm going to be able to, what's the worst thing that can really happen, right? I mean, take that to its logical conclusion. Really, is your house going to fall down? Or is there really important things going to be put in jeopardy simply because you had the audacity to say yes to an opportunity? I don't think so, right? I think sometimes we just need to prove it to ourselves over and over again. It's the best way to do it.
What I've tried is taking little baby steps, like to practice, like, okay, something is is out of your zone of comfort. Well, maybe rather than applying for another role or something, to practice with something that's maybe more accessible, and then to grow
Absolutely.
into something else, something more
And
important.
it doesn't even need to be necessarily career related, right? It can be anything else. It could be, picking up a hobby that you've never picked up on. Get comfortable with being in that zone where you are not an expert. Get comfortable, right? I was having this discussion even with my son, right? My son has a tendency to be one of those kids that, like, well, if he's not perfect at it from the start, he will walk away from it. And I try to make sure that he understands that life is a growth process, and if you're in the growth phase, you are always going to feel like it's chafing against you. It's not going to be a comfortable feeling, and you have to be comfortable with that discomfort. So whatever field that you feel safer in, let's say, right, where it's not maybe as drastic as your career, push yourself in that direction and just make yourself comfortable with the discomfort. And as you get comfortable in the discomfort, you can start going into more and more risky ventures, let's put it that way, right? I think that it's a muscle that you develop just like anything else. And when you start exercising, and when you start a new exercise, or even if you've plateaued and you want to get to that next level, there's going to be some discomfort for a while as you're growing that muscle. And that's the good pain that all of those trainers tell you about, right? You have to get comfortable with that, and push yourself beyond those boundaries.
And other than just kind of doing it because you obviously have that personality, you're just going to jump. You may not want to go into a helicopter, which we talked about a little bit earlier, but I'm pretty sure if it was put in front of you, you would probably just do it. But not everyone has that in them.
Yeah.
And so, well, initially, I think everyone can. But are there other methods that maybe you've used, or other people have used, that can help them become more comfortable with uncomfortable situations?
Right. Yeah. I think, again, it's going to be very specific to everybody, right? And it's hard for me to prescribe something, that could go across the board and could be applicable to everybody's life. I think the first thing you have to be is self-aware, right? Where you have to start thinking about yourself, and you have to start understanding that negative thought process and that voice inside your head is not telling you the truth all the time, right? One of the best books that I've ever read, and I think it should be prescribed reading for everybody on the planet, is called The Untethered Soul. And it is about disconnecting yourself from your thoughts and even your emotions, and being the observer of your thoughts and of your emotions. I think we need to be have a little perspective, right, between our thoughts and our emotions and our fears, and put them back into a context. So I think self-awareness, the first thing you would need to focus on, if you have, the very, very first building block, is self-awareness, and understand what your own triggers are, and then kind of build strategies around those to be able to help you get to that point. And again, I think one of the big influences of our life is the people that we gather ourselves around with, right? The people we surround ourselves with, our circle. If our circle is not encouraging, if our circle is very conservative, if our circle is risk averse, we are very much less likely to want to go in that direction. Whereas if we surround ourselves with people, or at the very least reach for resources like this, like this webinar or books or podcasts or whatever, that encourage us to just put it aside for 2 seconds and say, well, what if, yes, the calamity could occur. there's always that possibility, I guess. It's not very probable, but there's a possibility that the calamity could occur. What if it doesn't? What are you missing if it doesn't, right? And you're not going to hit all of the balls that get thrown at you. You're going to miss it sometimes, but if you're not at the plate with a bat in your hand, you're never going to hit a ball, right? You're never going to get there. So, I think the kind of people that we would have around the table here today are the kind of people that want to get to that, right? So there's only really one way to do it, and it's to really be aware of who you are and what it is that you're comfortable with. You're right. I would probably get into the helicopter if it was put in front of me, but man, I would have to have a talk with those pilots.
Absolutely. I'm sure you would. There's some really good comments. I just have to say in the chat here, and that's fine. I said put it in the Q&A, but I'm following the chat, so that's all good.
Good.
I'm going to ask a really interesting question about, you're saying surrounding yourself with people and circles, and this person is asking, how do we build a new circle?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And it's tough because the minute that you start thinking, it's funny, again, I'm not going to say anything here that hasn't been said a million times in every book that you can read or any podcast that you listen, but I think truths are repeated for a reason. It's because they're true, right? And sometimes it's just a matter of hearing it in that context that makes it click. The hardest part about making change in your life is realizing that sometimes you're going to have to let go of the stuff that's holding you back. Realizing that some people that you care about and love may not be able to make that journey with you, and that you need to expand. And I can promise you, the way that, call it whatever you call it in your mind, whether it's the universe, your God or whatever, the minute that you put that energy out there and you say to yourself, I want to go in that direction, you're going to get challenged, right? It's going to come to you. All of a sudden, you're going to be challenged. And one of the big things is going to be the circle of people. And again, I think it's a question of taking a little bit of a risk and putting yourself out there. It's joining conversations like this and having the guts to ask a question. It could be that simple. It's signing up for the next event where hopefully we're going to be in person, right? And you can come up and talk to the panelists, and you can talk to the people around you and say, I think I'm really interested in this, and I want to go out there a little more. The worst thing you could do is stay in your corner and wait for it to drop from the heavens. It usually doesn't, right? At one point, again, you're going to have to say yes to one small thing and go out there. I think the minute that you look around yourself, if you envy someone, that's the person you should be trying to reach out to, right? If you see someone doing something that you say, man, I wish I could do that. Guaranteed they weren't born, most of us weren't born with these abilities. We worked on getting better at them, right? So and I've never reached out to anybody and been and asked for their advice or asked for their mentorship or asked or how they got there, where they bit my head off when I asked it, right? Everybody kind of, if you've been through that journey, knows and remembers what it was when you were at the other end of it, and is willing to kind of reach out and help and give you a little bit of guidance or at least throw a couple of books your way or podcasts your way that could help, right?
Marion, and so tell me about your journey from an IT perspective, from the tech industry. How has it been? What's the situation today with women? Is it improving? Is it still lagging in comparison to other maybe?
Oh yeah. Right. I would say yes and yes. Right. It's certainly gotten better. right? Guaranteed, right? The first job that I had, just to everybody, put in context, I came out of when I came out of school, and again, to be perfectly transparent and put everybody in context, my life started out, I wasn't anywhere near IT. My family trained racehorses for a living, so and 3 generations of racing horses. So my father, to his dying day, did not understand what I do now. It's when I decided to go back to school and study IT. The first job that I had when I came out of school, I was a Unix administrator for a small software company in Westmount, where we dealt a lot with the steel industry in the US, and most of our customers were in the US. And we would just field calls and literally like dial in through modems onto their Unix systems, because there was this big black box that most of them didn't understand. And we did almost all of the support for them. And yeah, I was one of 2 girls that were hired that year. We were the first 2 females to ever be hired in that company from an infrastructure perspective. IT as a whole has a tendency to be very male dominated. Infrastructure as a subcategory of IT is even more male dominated and has less female representation. So yeah, we were the first 2 girls. They sat us next to each other. Thank God we became friends. And I don't know if Helen is here, but if she happens to be listening, hi Helen, I miss you, because we were sitting next to each other. We gave a lot of support to each other. But I remember one incident that happened back then, and you're going to say, right, it was 25 years ago, but still, I remember an incident that happened where we had one client that we knew had a tendency to hire a lot of military guys, veterans that were hired at this particular location. And with veterans of the Marines specifically, in this case, you can get like 2 kind of profiles that come at you. You've got the guys that have lived with toxic masculinity and toxic male leadership that doesn't listen, and they're all like, I want to work with women. This is where we should be heading. And then you've got the other kind that doesn't really want to embrace that quite as much. And I just happened to be on the receiving end of the second kind one day. And I literally picked up the phone, and the first thing I got was, I didn't call tech support to get a chick. And I was like, okay, well, this is starting off well, right? Luckily for me, our ticketing system had a whole lot of information about what his problem might be. And I just happened to have worked on the same problem that we had with another client not long. So I kind of kept him on the phone and kept him screaming at me while I worked on what he had to do. And at the end of the call, I just kind of said, well, thank you, sir, for your feedback. Can you try it out for me, please? And of course it worked. And I got silence on the other end of the line, and kind of said, have a nice day. And I hope you're satisfied with the service that you got today, right? It's not nearly as bad as it was. I think I'm one of the really lucky ones right now, in that, first of all, I work for a company that wins prizes for diversity. I think Intact has got we're at 52% of our executives that are female. So, that's incredible. And even on the infrastructure and IT side, I'm very lucky. I just recently got a new vice president who's female and who has an infrastructure background, and who's got a networking background, which is, nirvana. Okay, so it's the first time in my career, however, that I have an executive on the infrastructure side that's a female. Has it gotten better? It certainly has. Is it parity? Is it perfect? Do I still get rolled eyes and in meetings? And yeah, I do. I'm I'm a pretty verbose person. I have a big personality. I take up a lot of room. I'm not shy with raising my points. It's not always easy to get to that place where you're comfortable with the feeling in the room. That's not always so welcoming, or even being talked over, or having people in a meeting after you've made a point start off another conversation by saying what Marion means is, no, Marion just said what she meant, right? There's no need to explain what Marion just said. So I think that's, and we all have to kind of navigate that every day, right? It's not just in the workplace, it's outside the workplace. I read another article that I read that really kind of expanded my brain and kind of blew my mind a little bit, was a trans man who had started out his life as a woman and had transitioned towards male. And he wrote this wonderful article about what it was like to navigate the world from the female perspective and from the male perspective, and how things have changed in his life, and how it's so pervasive and so taken for granted that it's almost normal that men don't realize it because they don't see it, right? They're not exposed to it quite the way that we are. And in his article, he was saying something as simple as going to the hardware store and coming in. I present as male and I say, I want these list of screws, and I get given the screws and off you go, right? Nobody questions, nobody says a word. You're on your own. You figure it out. If it works, it works. It doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's on you, right? Whereas when he was presenting as a female, he would go to the hardware store and ask for these screws, and the first thing he would be met with was, well, what are you trying to do, right? And okay, I'm trying to do this. Well, that's not what you need. You need these, right? So the idea that the poor guy behind the desk is probably just trying to help you and wants you to have the right thing. The problem is that you're assuming I need your help. You're assuming I don't already know what I'm doing. It's a patronizing way of walking through the world. And those micro things that we live a million times in our lives add up to maybe contributing to why we feel we have to be perfect before we apply, right? So all of these things that we've been conditioned with all of our lives, adds up to the thinking that, well, if I'm going to apply for this, I better be perfect, because the first thing I'm going to be doing is being questioned. So I think it's important that we realize, and everybody keeps talking about it, and everybody keeps bringing up the point. What I've found really encouraging is that in the last 5-6 years, I would say, those men that used to come up to me and in private encourage me now do it publicly. That is huge. And that's oh my gosh, that is huge. And in IT specifically, it's huge. And it gives so much of a boost. I don't know that men realize how much of a boost it gives to women around them. If me, like I said, at my age, still gets a boost from that, I can only imagine what it does when you're in your 20s and you're first starting out, right? So to do it publicly and to be encouraged and to be supported publicly is a huge thing. And I think that's the biggest change that I've noticed in the last few years.
Talking a little bit more about the inner critic, as you were telling the story, a lot of the things that had happened or the stories that you had heard about would basically feed someone's inner critic, and feed their lack of self-confidence or feeling of not being good enough and not ready to just say yes. So do you have any experiences in your career where that critic was really prominent? And then how, other than just saying, it's not, the house is not going to burn down, but how did you just stop that inner critic from, stopping your progression?
I think again, I didn't stop the inner critics from being there. I don't think you could ever stop it from being there. And I think, as a matter of fact, those people who don't have that inner critic, or those people who are walking around saying or pretending like they don't have that inner critic, are very dangerous, right? I don't think those people should be in positions of leadership, right? I think it's a very, very good thing to have that self-awareness. However, it's that space where you stop yourself. And have it, of course, I had it stopped. And you know what? I think it was more prevalent, obviously, when I was younger, right? I think experience has a lot to do with it. I think just seeing life progression and understanding that, you know, like I said, the world will continue, the sun will rise tomorrow, you will have another chance, you know, is something that I wish, even though I know I've heard it a million times when I was younger, I wish it would have stuck in my head just a tiny bit more. Something else that I think I had a bad habit of, again, understanding yourself and being self-aware of what it is that stops you. I'm a self-sabotager. That's what I do, right? This is how I do it for myself, right? So seeing all of those times where I've allowed that habit to raise within me, and looking back and saying, oh, I did it there. Oh, I missed an opportunity there. Oh my God, you know, did I really do that kind of thing, right? Did I really let that boyfriend of mine when I was 25 years old convince me that I was better off not trying something than I would have been if I had tried it? What would my life look like now, right? So I think we can't demonize the inner critic. I think we need to put it into perspective over and over and over and over and over again. And it's boring work, and it's not fun. It's not fun to look at yourself and see all the things that you're not good at and that you're not. But I think that if you're interested in moving forward, or if you're interested in growing beyond, right? I think you don't have a choice. And in certain cases, listen, I've never met a person that I respected or envied that didn't go through something in their life at one point, right? It takes a lot, you know, there's another quote that I read in a book somewhere that said, it takes a mighty big earthquake to create a mountain. Like, it takes a mighty big earthquake to create a mountain. Right? In my life, I had no choice at certain times. When I decided to leave my family's business and go into something completely different that no one in my family had ever even considered going into IT. It's not even something that was on our radar. I had no choice. I left the family business because it wasn't going well, and I needed something that I could make a living out of, that I knew I was going to be good at, that I, you know, found interesting. I had to take that leap. I say to you, if you are fortunate enough to have never been challenged, please, by all means, challenge yourself, right? Find those places where you can challenge yourself. I think it's a mistake that we make sometimes, even with our own kids. I know I do it too. I want his life to be perfect. I want him to never have to hurt and to never be challenged. But I also know that all of the challenges that I have lived through my life built me. And if I cocoon him, he will never learn those skills when things are small, right? Challenge yourself. Please, by all means, go out there and push yourself just a little bit. And there's no other way to do it. It's the sucky part of our conversation, because you got to put yourself in those places, and you just have to figure out what's comfortable for you and where your areas of improvement are, and then work. Again, if you can find someone that you can trust to work with on that, and you could do it together and say, I'll give you honest feedback, you give me honest feedback, and let's stay open, right? Let's stay open, knowing that it's coming from a place of caring and love, and not criticism or jealousy or anything, because that's going to happen to you too, right? Learn when to ignore the critics on the outside, right? But build yourself that support system, and be willing to listen to what people have to say. I think it's the key. I really do.
Marion, you said that at one point you decided to go back to school and you chose IT.
Yes.
One of the ladies one of the person in the group said that she's thinking of going back to school for computer science. Do you have any advice for somebody that's looking to transition into this milieu? What recommendations would you have?
Be sure that this is what you want to do, I would say, first of all, right? Because and not to discourage anyone, I think it's a great field to get into. There are so many things within IT that you can focus on. I think specifically if it's a girl that's asking that question, if it's a woman, I think this is like, yes, do it, and don't be afraid to look at all the possibilities, right? Don't be intimidated by the idea that IT is just coding. It's not, right? There's all kinds of opportunities and fields that you can explore while you're doing it. One of the funny things that happened to me when I went back to school, and it was a teacher that apparently did this every year. One of the first courses that I had to take was an assembler coding course. And if anybody knows codes and coding languages, assembler is very, very like, you're at, one level above the, the zeros and ones type of coding language. Quite challenging, right? And he did it on purpose, because he said, those who can go through this course, if you can manage this particular project, I'm going to weed out all of the ones that can't do this right away, right? So we started out as like a class of 60, and by the end of the project, we were like 25, right? Because it's one of those things that it'll show you right away whether or not you are fit for this kind of work. It's something that requires a lot of analytics. It's something that requires a lot of logical thinking, right? If you're a very creative type, you can still do it in IT, but you're going to have to go through the fire of the analytics before you get to that creativity part. That's on the other side of it, right? There's possibilities. And then from there on, I think it's, choose your program, choose where you want to go. And again, same thing that I did when I was in school is get that group of friends, get that group around you of those that you see that are doing well and that are, maybe a little bit better in some of the aspects that you're not better at, and gravitate towards them. Incredibly, no matter what program you choose, YouTube is going to be your best friend. Google is the best friend of everybody in IT. And anyone who tells you anything differently is lying to you. I remember when I was, as an SME, as a technical person, I remember going back, with my family and everybody else that I was talking to, trying to explain to them what it is that I did. And in the end, what I told them that I did was, I read logs properly and I don't panic. And I teach other people how to read logs properly and I don't panic. And then we figure it out together. A lot of the times people, when they get into IT, especially in the technical side, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, when all hell is breaking loose, the one thing that you have to, the superpower is staying calm. and taking it one piece at a time. And that's what I would say to you is don't panic. Read. Just read. You're going to learn. If you're even a little bit technically inclined, everybody can learn what IT is.
Absolutely. Thank you. There is one question also, sorry, in the Q&A, which goes back to the inner critic.
Yep.
And the person's asking, how do you deal with the inner critic and doubts that aren't really coming from you, but from the outside? I would just say ignore them, but I know it's a lot more complex than that. So.
Everything that I've said here is a lot easier said than done. Okay, let's all agree on that one, right? Everything is easier said than done, especially if you're surrounded by people who, for various reasons, for whatever reason it is, right? I come from a family of people who take risks for a living. I come from a family of people who work in a business that is based on gambling. So, of course, my entire family is quote unquote brave, right? Has it always served them? Ooh, no, because sometimes they took more risks than were good for them. But I think that again, the community that you come from and your circle around you is going to influence your inner critic a whole lot. And sometimes you're gonna be aware once you start listening to it and detaching yourself from it. And that's the key, right? If you can detach yourself from that voice inside of your head, sometime, and it's not gonna happen right away, but the more that you practice detaching yourself from that voice inside of your head, all of a sudden you're gonna hear it has somebody else's voice, right? It sure sounds like someone else. It's not actually even me. It's an imprint that you got from years ago for whatever reason, right? I have friends of mine whose parents lived through the Second World War in Europe and immigrated here. You could, like, if we have a nuclear war tomorrow, I can show up at their house and they will be able to survive for the next 6 months because they stockpiled so much stuff, because that's their mentality, their imprint that they got was be ready for every catastrophe. And they are now passing that on to their children. But sometimes, right, we have to detach ourselves from those voices. They have the best intentions when they give you that. It's not a nasty thing that they're trying to do to you, right? It's their survival instinct that kicked in and they're trying to pass it on to you. But, you know, the survival instinct that we had when we were, out in the wild is no longer applicable, but those instincts are still there. And what happens is that we turn them inward, right? So all of that vigilance that we have towards the outside world, thinking we're going to get eaten by a bear, well, you know, since that is no longer our reality, it gets turned inward and we start attacking our own psyche because of it. And I think that the first thing you have to do is practice that very first step is the detachment. That voice is not yours. It comes from the outside most of the time. I don't know a kid. You go into a kindergarten and you ask them, who here can sing? Everybody's gonna raise their hand. Right? Who can draw? I can draw. Right? Do that same exercise when they're in 5th grade. Everybody's gonna point to that one kid who can sing, or everybody else is gonna point to that one girl who can draw. Something happens along the way, right? And it's not necessarily ours. We get told that we're not good enough at something, or that person is better, therefore why, and then you know, your own conditioning steps in and says you can stop trying now, you're never going to be perfect. I think perfect is like the worst enemy, right? The perfection is the worst enemy that we've got, because it's a forever moving goal, right? It's the moving goalpost is perfection, and it's an insidious one, because you could be telling yourself, well, I just need to make this, I just need, it's, you know, if I just get this certification, if I just reach this particular, then I'll be ready. And if I just, so it kind of gets into your head that, well, you know, I just need a little bit more. I just need to, you know, be a little bit more ready, and it never ends. And you always are chasing that post. At one point or another, you've got to stop and you just got to take that leap.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the participants actually put in something like the original definition of confidence from Latin was basically action, taking that leap. And so I thought it was brilliant that she put it in there. So thank
Absolutely.
you for the participants.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Action
you
is
see,
key.
yeah. And language can teach us a whole lot, right? We could have a whole conversation about that too, right? The language can teach us a whole lot about how we speak to ourselves and what it actually means. And I think understanding that words have power. Words carry energy, right? And even if they're spoken in the best of interests and with the best of intentions, words have an energy to them that stick with you. And if you disassociate yourself with that voice and you pretend it in the book, The Untethered Soul, they ask you to do an exercise of pretending that voice in your head is an actual person and sitting down next to them and letting them speak and seeing it if you would actually be friends with somebody like that. Right? Would you actually be friends with someone who spoke to you like that? Would you ever want to have that person and you live with that person in your head 24/7, right? Externalize it to you, give it a name, call it Billy, whatever, right? And notice the patterns that you are doing to yourself over and over and over again every day, and then wonder why you are reticent to take that step. Journaling is one of the tools that I've used my entire life, right? I get up every day and I journal, and I do it at night too. And I let that inner voice be on paper in front of me, or, you know, type it out or whatever. Give yourself a couple of weeks of doing that and then go back and read.
I'd like to add, that's a great to the way we talk to ourselves. The words are so powerful. I read the book from Carol Dweck, and it's The Power of Yet, where she adds a little word, the word yet, to a sentence, and I can't yet. So already, rather than saying I can't yet, changes the whole dynamic and makes you feel so much better. So yep. That little word of 3 letters makes you puts you in a much different mindset and puts you in a better position. So that's Absolutely. Great advice. That's a Absolutely. Great advice.
No, I think that again, it's being self-aware enough to, number one, realize that there's somebody, not you, talking to yourself, right, in your head. That's number one. Realize that it's there. And we all have it. It's normal, right? Now, detach yourself from it. Look at it. And I am the worst person in the world to anybody who says to me, go meditate. Right? It lasts exactly 2.5 seconds because my brain is constantly going. I have a very hard time. However, I can journal. Right? I can do. I can write for an hour. No problem. But as I'm doing that, as I'm writing, I'm allowing that flow to come out of me, and I feel cleansed afterwards, right? Because I'm not, it kind of came out, and I'm not ruminating anymore, right? But the real part of the exercise is going back and reading afterwards. That's where the real self-awareness happens, because as I'm writing it, it's just my, you know, my inner dialogue coming out on paper. It's the rereading afterwards that really brings me the benefit of it, because then I recognize, first of all, I recognize patterns in myself that I'm not aware of, right? It's very stark that I keep doing. I have the same reaction to the same stimulus all the time, right? And I keep getting upset at the same things all the time, right? So that the next time it happens, I can kind of go, oh, okay, this is one of my triggers, right? How could I handle this differently? How could I make this better? How could I bring this to another level? And I think to me, that's been a very big tool throughout my entire life. It's not for everybody, right? But I think it's one of the most effective ones that I've come across. And then once you see that, you can then use the other tools like that and say, I'm not there yet, right? It's recognizing is the first step, I think.
Yeah. Being self-aware, as you had said earlier, Marion, and some other people in the chat were also talking about that, is super important. And I would love to stay with you for the next 3 hours and continue talking, because there's a lot more to be said. But we do have to kind of start wrapping things up. Lena, I don't know if there are any other specific questions in the chat or the Q&A we can look at before we
I do see Mary said, I'm saying yes to post-secondary education when we were talking about that. I will be the first in my family for generations. I'm saying yes to a career. So I hope that Marion's insight was helpful. Glad to hear that, Mary.
We had asked in the chat, please post the things that you're going to say yes to now that you've heard this talk, or things that you have said yes to. So it's great that people are sharing.
Oh my God, I just got goosebumps.
Lena.
Yeah, and also, giving that critic a name. So those are all great points. And like you just said, Lisa, the comment about the definition in Latin, that's fantastic, to trust or to take a leap. I really see that. I have that image, that visual image of taking a leap. And so that kind of helps me actually to, to take a chance.
I'm so happy to hear that. I tell you, I just got goosebumps, right? Sometimes it's just that one context that makes it real for people. The last thing I would say is take care of yourselves, right? All of those things that your mother told you to do, she was right. Get your sleep, drink your water, make sure that you're taking care of yourselves and you are listening to yourselves, because no one else is going to do it for you. And it's the best thing that you can do for yourself is be centered and be brave.
Marion, Larochelle, thank you so much for your time today. I thought it was a super uplifting and inspirational kind of journey that we went through. So thank you very much.
It's fantastic. Thank you.
Sorry, one thing that I do want to mention before people start dropping off, because I think Marion would be perfect for this too, but we have a mentorship program at Will National, which is an amazing program. I'm part of that committee. And so we help to match mentors and mentees across all different types of organizations. Registration is open now, so go to the Will website and check it out. It's a super personally and professionally enriching experience. So do go check that out. And there are lots of other events coming, career development, speaker series, and the Montreal chapter is really hoping to have more and more events like this. And as I said, we can't wait to see everyone in person soon. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Marion, thank you again. Lena, thank you for being here with me today. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. I had so much fun. Can't wait to do this again one day.
Excellent.